We're back in World War II. I've got a pretty amazing story to tell you today. This kind of Christmas themed. It happened at this time of year. I know Christmas has kind of been and gone already, but I had a really good one. I went to go and see the Christmas fireworks, well, the New Year's Eve fireworks that they have around the London Eye, in London, of course. And, it's where I heard the inspiration for this story. Whilst I was stood there freezing in the cold because we had to get in at 8:30, which is when they close the gates. And you got to wait all that time stood up until midnight. So probably better to watch them on TV. But the atmosphere was really good. Kiss random people, which is always nice. And but my friend who went with me, she was telling me about the true story behind Inglourious Basterds, the Quentin Tarantino film with Brad Pitt as Lieutenant Aldo Rain in it. Apparently, it's based on an actual fighting force, which is what I'm going to tell you about in this video, and it involves Wolverine. I don't know if I imagined that bit. We had to take a hit flask of Di Serono to keep warm, of course, but yeah, it was merry. It was really merry. By the time the fireworks got there, I had no clue how to get home. It was 3 hours of that, holy moly. But anyway, I better keep on track. Firstly, if you're interested, the game I'm playing here is Heroes and Generals. It's a free game on Steam. I say this because I do always put the game in the title, but sometimes people still don't know. So if you're wondering, that's the game, because it is quite nice playing a World War II game, since every other game that seems to come out at the moment is a modern shooter. But they've had a big update recently, a lot of new weapons, a couple of new tanks. The Russians have got the one I'm in right now, which is the T-70, and I believe the Germans have got a Panzerkampfwagen, which I watched Indiana Jones last night. That's how German people speak in British and American World War II films, so I love those films. But as I was saying, yeah, good fun. When you get in one of these big battles I'm in now, they've added in a little close quarter map as well that you can play. But these big battles, because we've got to push across this little lightly defended bridge in this town. There's some people who are in the church here at the moment. And then we've got to go from here across to a much larger town, push across a river, which is very heavily defended, and get into a cathedral. And there's some really cool sniper and tank gameplay in this as well. And a bit of whack-a-mole. That's what it looks like to me when they pop on. That was great timing by that guy there. But it's mainly the guys in the tanks like him. That reminds me of whack-a-mole. This story, though, my friend was telling me about Inglourious Basterds. Apparently, it was based on this British group of soldiers called X-Corps. It was a group of exclusively Jewish soldiers who come from all countries and wanted to fight together as like a specialist unit to take out the Germans in revenge for all the horrors that they'd seen. However, when I read about it today, it seemed like they were mainly a reconnaissance unit, so I decided to dig a little bit deeper, and that's when I heard about the Devil's Brigade, an American-Canadian group of special forces soldiers who were trained like James Bond as ski troops, parachute assaulters, mountain climbers, hand-to-hand combat, knife fighting, basically everything you would need to operate behind enemy lines. And believe it or not, Wolverine was part of them. According to Marvel Comics, Wolverine's backstory is that he was part of the Special Service Force, which was the official name of the Devil's Brigade. And if you're wondering where they got the name Devil's Brigade from, they used to paint their faces black before they went into combat, so they couldn't be seen when they were sneaking about at night. And the Germans used to call them the Black Devils, and that's where the name came from. After World War II ended as well, they'd been trained that extensively that they were too badass, basically, so they had to be broken up into the Green Berets because they had so extensive training there wasn't any use for it anymore. Of all the soldiers in Devil's Brigade, though, one of them stood out in particular. That was Tommy Prince, a Native American, grew up on an Indian reserve, spent most of his youth hunting and fishing, so he was right at home, sneaking behind enemy lines and participating in the kind of activities Devil's Brigade participated in. And of course, by participating, I mean sneaking into the SS officers' barracks at night when they're all asleep, killing one of them so the rest have got something nice to wake up to in the morning, stealing the rest of their shoes whilst they're asleep, and then sneaking out there as if nobody had ever been. Just imagine waking up to that the next day. That's one of the things Tommy Prince did. You see, he used to carry a pair of moccasins along with his army boots, so when he needed to go undetected, he'd switch them out, and from what the other soldiers were saying, he could pretty much travel silently through any terrain. Now, through most of World War II, Devil's Brigade fought as part of the Italian campaign, because of course Italy at that point was controlled by Mussolini, who supported Hitler. It was a really difficult country for the Allies to take back as well, because it's shaped for defence, Italy, because it's quite a long, thin country. It's obviously shaped like a woman's leg that stretches into the Mediterranean, and then you've got like a stiletto heel shape at the bottom of the country. But what this meant was Hitler Mussolini could just set up lines of defence like across the leg from east to west up the country, and the Allies would have to push through these continuous lines of defence. Almost kind of reminds me of like Lord of the Rings, you know, where they put fires on the hills to signal to one another, except instead of fires in Italy they had forts full of Germans and mortars. So on the 3rd of December 1943, Devil's Brigade was sent in to attack one of the forts called Monte Difensa, which was basically a sheer cliff face with a Wolfenstein-style fort on the top of it, filled with Germans using their Nebelwerfers, which I think in German means smoke mortar, but they weren't actually smoke mortars, because they just called them that, the Germans, to trick the League of Nations, who for some reason always remind me of Sean Connery and his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. That's how I think of them whenever I read about it. But basically the League of Nations became the UN, so they kind of worked like that. But they wanted to trick them into thinking they were doing like legitimate things, was actually the Germans were breaking the Treaty of Versailles because they filled them with poison gas. So that's what Devil's Brigade had to overcome. Where Eagles Dare style raid on this Castle Wolfen style fort filled with Germans shooting poison gas. Despite these odds, Devil's Brigade climbed up the steepest part of the cliff, because that was the least defended part, and they were the only unit actually trained in that kind of intense mountain climbing. They managed to surprise the Germans, but the Germans fought back really heavily, and 77% of Devil's Brigade died taking the fort. They succeeded, but that's like 3/4 of all your friends dying during December. It's a lot of people. Now, although the Allies had managed to break through the Bernard line of defence by taking this fort, there was the much more heavily defended Gustav line of defence, and that was pretty much the only way the Allies had of getting through Rome, either through that line of defence or by going round by the sea. The Allies decided the best plan was to land just south of Rome at the port of Anzio, so go by sea so they could go behind the Gustav line. And of course, Devil's Brigade, given their success, was called in to help with this. It was at this battle that Tommy Prince, for something that actually would sound like it's from a Hollywood film, got the Medal of Bravery. You see, the port of Anzio was essentially marshland around it, so when the Allies landed, they couldn't get out of there quickly enough, and because the Germans had intercepted communications, they knew they were landing there, so they basically trained all of their German artillery on Anzio. So what Tommy Prince volunteered to do was crawl nearly 2 kilometres, carrying a telephone wire, like reeling it out as he went along, up to the enemy artillery. Well, there was a farmhouse about 200 yards away from it that he went into, and then radio back the exact location of the artillery so the Allies could take it out. Unfortunately, it didn't take very long for a badly aimed Allied shell to hit and cut the telephone wire, so they didn't know where the German artillery had been moved to anymore. Upon realising this had happened, Tommy Prince decided something needed to be done. So he looked around the farmhouse, saw that the farmer had left some of his old clothes around. He dressed himself in that. Bear in mind, doing that behind enemy lines makes you a spy, so he wouldn't be shot on sight if he wasn't shot by the Germans straight away. He walked straight out of the farmhouse, carrying his hoe, pretended to read some of his crops, shook his fist at the Germans for damaging one of the chicken coops with a shell, even though it wasn't his farm, and then, as he was pretending to weed, managed to find and fix together the telephone wire. And believe it or not, the German soldiers of the artillery didn't have a clue. In fact, they waved back to him when he shook his fist at them. So he managed to get the wire fixed together. I mean, it wasn't exclusively because of this, but shortly afterwards the Allies managed to push out of Anzio and take back Rome, which pretty much secured them the rest of Italy. But yeah, I just thought that was a really cool story about that. That's the basis of Inglourious Basterds, and presumably to some extent Wolverine as well. Now, before the video ends, I've got a very random and completely unrelated question I'm hoping somebody clever can help me with. It's to do with Unreal Engine, so if you're not familiar with development on that, then you might as well close the video now, because you won't know what I'm talking about. Well, basically, I've been trying to create dynamic 2D water, so if you drop something on the surface of the water or you jump out of it, the surface ripples. I know how to do it in Unity, because you can use the line render to create the surface and then put meshes underneath so the water's like on a series of springs, but I don't know how to do the equivalent on Unreal Engine because I'm not as good with it. I don't know if anybody can help me, but I am pretty much 100% stuck at the moment, so if you could send me a private message through if you know, I will be forever grateful. But anyway, thanks for watching the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and I shall see you in the next chapter.